Welcome back, everybody, to the THREATCON1 Podcast, the place to discuss emerging threats with the people who matter. Patrick, how you doing, my man?
What's up? Good morning. How are you?
I'm good, dude. We're back, and we've got an awesome guest today. Let me please introduce to our listeners Lillian Lang, Senior Manager of Cyber Threat Intelligence at Chevron. Lillian, welcome to the show.
Yeah, welcome.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate the invite.
We're super pumped that you could spend some time with us. Glad we could figure out some of our scheduling and tech things going on, and we're off and running. So Lillian, you've got a killer background. Super impressed with some of the things that you've done. Also, I might add a THREATCON1 presenter in September. Yes. We thank you for that. It was great to meet you there. Everybody should check out our THREATCON1.org site to see Lillian's presentation. It was top notch. Your background's awesome. Let's talk about you. You've got an extensive history working both in the Fed and now in Chevron. Give us an idea of how you got started in cyber and like kind of what's your journey been like so our listeners can get that like the real feel for who you are.
So I've been in intelligence analysis for like 20 plus years. I went straight into working for the federal government as an intelligence analyst really right after 9/11. So I was in college when 9/11 happened, and the plan was to go to law school. I watched a lot of Law and Order growing up. I think I wanted to put away bad guys, but instead, 9/11 happened, and I just kind of started looking elsewhere. Ended up working in the intelligence community. I started out as a weapons analyst, so looking at foreign weapon systems and focused a lot on like radar technology.
Oh, cool.
And then I moved into what they call technical counterintelligence, which was really focused on protecting communications that transit free space. So think like radio frequency and satellite communications and that kind of a thing. And while doing that, I bumped up with cyber a lot and kind of got to know some cyber people and got a certificate and then moved laterally over to be a cyber threat intel analyst, and then left the government in 2022 and moved to Chevron. So been there. This is my 4th year at Chevron.
Wow.
Hopefully that kind
cool.
of explains it.
That's super cool. Give us an idea of like when you're a weapons analyst, like what are some of the cool things that you could do that sort of like link into cyber a little bit?
Yeah, I think for me it was really, understanding how weapon systems talk to one another, and also getting the background and understanding kind of just like how from a defensive posture, let's say, a country might be watching its horizon or things coming over the horizon at them, wanting to understand like and make sure that their homeland is safe, like just sort of understanding that perspective and just really starting to I took sort of that and then linked over to, satellite communications and really understanding how, systems speak to one another, basically.
Yeah. I worked on some satellite stuff too, as well. And this was in like 2012, 2013. And it was just interesting, how there weren't any security controls. Literally most connections, I think, were over like unencrypted telnet. Like very like you have limited connection, right? Limited ability to update those things. And I think now with where we're at today, things are much, much more modernized, but also you put those things in the air and they're like, what, 20, 30 years old sometimes?
Yeah. Yeah. So sometimes they, like you said, like that now today, there's a lot of, I think more secure birds that are up there, but there's still some insecure ones that are still going. We're still using
30 years later.
Yeah. 30 years later. And just kind of, just understanding all of that. I think I always thought that was really interesting, and how, if, a bad actor wanted to, they could kind of monitor unencrypted traffic, and just understanding how that affects things and what kind of information they can glean from that. I think it's all like really interesting.
It definitely is. Well, and it's like as soon as like certain protocols change, right? Like everything else has to fall alongside with that. So it's never really like the job's never really finished, right? And I think that sort of is indicative of everything that we do in cyber, which is like things evolve, threats evolve, technology evolves, like, and like so many times now, I do feel like everything on the cyber side kind of has to like, it almost has to evolve at the same speed to maintain the level of protections in whatever you're analyzing.
Yeah, for sure. I think just kind of understanding just how communications sort of work together more broadly, right, is important, and how encryption can affect how fast communications can get from one point to another. Like, and just like Patrick, I think you're talking about, just sort of the bandwidth and things is important to understand. But yeah, now like cyber with AI and everything, just it feels like it's moving super fast.
It sure is. Well, give us an idea of moving from, so your shift from the federal government to Chevron. Give us an idea of what pushed you from working directly in the government to working for arguably like one of the biggest companies in the world on the threat intelligence side. What was the motivation for that move, going to a totally different realm, but bringing some of the same, I would assume, some of the same skill set into the role at Chevron?
Yeah, so in the government, I was focused more on bad guys, overseas, and then sometimes you would find out this information and you'd pass it on to potentially, let's say like a law enforcement entity or something like the FBI here in the States that could do something about it. And it would just go into this like black hole and you'd never know. Like you'd never hear about it again. So that was one thing, is like I really wanted to kind of understand what was happening to companies in our country that I kept hearing about. You just kept hearing about all these incidents happening. And then like you're only kind of, I think, in the position I was in, I was only really reporting on like half of what was happening. Like I'm seeing like this part over here, but then as soon as it comes over to the US, like it's gone somewhere else. And so like you're just passing it along. And so I kind of wanted to, if it makes sense, like I kind of wanted to understand like from the victim's point of view.
Sure.
And so I started and where I was at in the government as well, like we didn't really cross paths as much. We were doing more the strategic side of analysis. We weren't necessarily crossing paths with the SOC in for the government. And so I wanted to, kind of get a better angle on that. And honestly, it was just kind of serendipity. Like I just found the job and applied for it.
Very cool.
That's great.
And I was like, and when I had the interview, I thought, wow, this is this. One of the things that attracted me to it, and one of the reasons I wanted to apply for the job, was that it's a similar mission set in my mind. Like I felt like the mission was similar. Like I went into the government because I wanted to protect people, places, and things related to the United States, and then like I feel like Chevron's an American company, and like what better thing to try to protect than like critical infrastructure, so you can potentially prevent like environmental disasters or loss of life or loss of energy, whatever it may be. So for me, the mission is what really drew me to Chevron, but it is a massive, massive company. Yeah.
Oh, it's huge.
That transition to private sector is interesting because I've worked on building cyber companies for a long time, and so much of it is like when you have these customers, you see what actually happens on the ground floor, which is it's a totally different perspective. And, then when you work directly in Intel, it's like much higher level, like you're seeing what's happening much earlier on, but a little less connected with what's happening on the ground floor. So well, welcome to the private sector.
Thank you.
Well, the other thing too, Patrick, too, is when you think about what you were doing in the Fed, and basically like, you pass information along, you take your analysis, you disseminate it, not sure what happens to it, probably brings it almost like full circle at Chevron for the things that you're working on, because now you're seeing like a real ROI coming out of the data that you're analyzing. in a way where you get like, not that you need to get more ROI out of it, but like to report into your team, it's like, hey, these are the things that matter. This is what we can do about it, versus just like kind of pushing it across. It seems like you just like, you can kind of do more with the analysis that you're already performing.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of, when I did support the military, that it's a much more, I think, tactical relationship. Like you said, it is like now we're, I able to take that kind of information and work with folks and develop mitigations. Whereas I think, when you're focused more on the policymaker, it's a little bit different. You're focused more on avoiding strategic surprise, right? And that's really most of your job. Whereas now it's a lot more, I would say, tactical, although, we try to do it all because it's one of the things we want to make sure we're making our CISO or CIO that they have that awareness as well, right? So that they're not surprised by anything. We want them to have that kind of strategic advantage when they're making a decision, right? But it's nice to see the fruit of the labor, I guess.
For sure.
to see that happen right away.
What I think our listeners would be really interested in would be like moving on to targeting, and where like critical infrastructure definitely sits like squarely in the crosshairs of countries like China, nation state sponsored, like groups who are always trying to probe to see what they could do to disrupt not just the US, but other countries as well too. Give us an idea of like specifically how large energy companies are targeted, and kind of like what this means, and maybe even like the things that you're consistently on the hunt for.
Yeah, I think more so than probably other industries, I will say the geopolitical winds out there in the world can really affect the energy industry. And that's definitely something that, I want analysts to make sure that they're paying attention to. Is I think you can't look at cyber in a vacuum. And when anybody's talking, I think about any of the, let's say, state-sponsored threat actors that are out there, you really have to understand the geopolitics at play. And so I think that just because of the nature of the business, it's energy, that definitely puts us in the crosshairs of state-sponsored threat actors. However, I think that whether or not the will or intent to act depends on sort of what's going on in the geopolitical arena, which is way beyond our control. And then I think also because being in the energy space, I think there's obviously a lot of investment. And so I think cyber criminals see that as potential opportunity, right? Like people, I think the phrase that was used like last year, the year before, was like big game hunting. So that's something we're always concerned about, cybercrime, as well. And I think those are probably, it's like everything, right? Like we're worried about everything.
Right.
But I think those are the two big things, right?
on that note, like this year in the Black Box, the chat logs, the first thing they do is they go to Zoom Info and they see what companies have the most money and then the industries. Yeah. So it's like, it's pretty clear, and they're, that's a ransomware actor, but it's pretty clear, like they're looking for targets that have money. Right. And then often industry, is there a willingness to pay a ransom? Combination of those things. I'm sure there's much more they're considering, but yeah, that's a real, it's a real reality for any company of size.
For sure. Well, I think what it also brings up is, and this is what we were talking sort of like pre-show today on, was supply chain cyber attacks, right? And the potential for those to have like a real downstream effect on not just the consumer, not just the companies supplying energy, but like all of the suppliers to consumers that are kind of like in the middle, right? Because it's not just Chevron just directly supplying oil or gas or, sort of like any energy supply. And, you actually were a presenter at THREATCON1. And, I think that, Lillian, one thing that you were really talking about is the MOVEit vulnerability, or the MOVEit file transfer software, had an enormous impact, and sort of like specifically on the supply chain, like the energy supply chain, but like the supply chain of companies, right? Like a lot of organizations don't really look at how other organizations who are providers or suppliers in whichever format that they're acting with a large company like a Chevron, what that domino effect is right downstream for everybody that's involved in it. Give us an idea of some of the background of your analysis on that, because that was definitely one of our most highly attended sessions at THREATCON1, and there was a lot of buzz afterwards about that and how good it was. Not that we're trying to flatter you, but it was a great presentation.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that was a crazy thing that happened, vulnerability, just because of how many businesses it affected, like how the reach of that vulnerability and that 0 day. And I think that's always a concern of ours. I mean, just actors out there getting a 0 day, taking advantage of it. And, I mean, you're the last to know. You don't want to ever be the last to know, right?
Yeah.
I think we were, like I said, we were kind of blessed in that situation because we ended up not being impacted, but many of our third parties were. And I think that's where it came into play was for us. So even if, I think, Tom, what you were saying is even if you're not directly affected, let's say country X isn't directly affected, but or company X, sorry, but company Y is, company Y may hold company X's information. Right. And so it's all of that. And I mean, there were energy companies that were absolutely affected by the Move It vulnerability. I think they were, they listed some. There were so many, there were hundreds of, I think thousands at the end of the day, companies that were affected. But again, it's not always necessarily that you're affected directly, but rather a third party of yours is affected and potentially has your information. But it's, it's definitely a concern. I mean, I think anytime we see a vulnerability like that, from our perspective, we jumped right into gear once we kind of heard what was going on, and just immediately trying to figure out, do we have this anywhere? Are we connected to anyone by this? And just trying to immediately remediate anything that we had that was exposed. And then after that, it's tracking it, right, to understand who your third parties are that got affected.
I think a lot of you look at a lot of the 0 days in the last couple of years, and I think a combination file transfer products, and particularly I think a lot of people that caught them by surprise because they're, number one, there's a lot of them out there that are just widely used and you don't even know they exist. I think we've seen that quite a bit. And so naturally people get their hands on the software, reverse engineer it, and then use a 0 day because it's on the internet often. We talk about network devices all the time, edge devices, but then the other one similarly is device management. So, different products in that space, we've seen a lot of similarly where a lot of people are compromised or exposed. And I think email systems are in kind of that similar boat, but I think a lot of people have moved away from hanging out mail servers on the internet these days, and typically are offloading that to Microsoft or Google. But yeah, it is interesting with that type of software. Do I have it internally? Do any of the people that hold my data have these products internally? Is real good question to ask in those scenarios.
Yeah, and it's not always clear, right? And and it's tough, I think, sometimes, trying to follow up with folks, but I mean, as well, because they're usually in the middle of trying to solve their own issues and do remediation, so it can be difficult. But file transfer just makes so much sense to me. It's oh yeah, why wouldn't you go after that? That just makes so much sense.
Oh, for sure.
There's just so much gold there.
To me, it kind of brings up the notion of all right, if you're seeing that third parties are affected by something like Move It, it brings up the notion of business continuity. Do I want to do business with this company anymore, even though they might be essential for distribution of product, distribution of the energy itself. Because if they're holding our customers' information, or if they're holding our own, as like in the case of Chevron, are they holding Chevron information, right? Like, do they have access to IP just through that connection on whatever app they're connected through, right? So it's like, do I want to do business with those companies?
Yeah, it's really, I think, a tough sort of nut to crack, and something that like companies have to deal with on a case by case basis, right? But like certainly something that I feel like Move It, at least in my opinion, seems to have, I think, shined a light on, and just that like, okay, people need to pay a little bit more attention to the fact that like, when these threat actors target third parties or parties that like cut across industries, there's a reason they do that, right? Because they can make a huge impact. And, you're just not necessarily thinking, I think, as a CTI team or any kind of cybersecurity team, you might not be thinking about like, if you're in one industry, like I'm in energy industry, you're not necessarily thinking about the threats to the legal industry. Or the
Exactly.
threats to the IT industry. Like you're only thinking about the threats to the IT industry in so much as like you use their products, right? And so I think that's kind of the challenge too, right? Is that mindset. But yeah, no, I think it's important for businesses, especially large corporations, to think about that, and as much as they can try to mitigate, or at least have some sort of, reporting. Like, hey, if we're going to do business together and you suffer a breach or I suffer a breach, like you let me know, I let you know, just like as a measure of good faith, and so that folks can mitigate things as quickly as possible.
It also brings up the notion too, Lillian, of like you can see the importance of being able to measure third-party risk with stuff like, a BitSight or a Black Kite or a security scorecard, right? Like,
yeah.
However, even if they're like 80% accurate, those findings still can raise some red flags internally, right? For being able to say like, hey, what are our like 100 critical providers? And in Chevron's case, it's probably in the neighborhood of thousands of providers, right? Like you can see that downstream effect that it would have if there were internet connection points between the two companies. Then you have to multiply that times every single one of them. And if they fall into like my critical provider bucket, it's like, no, you guys need to investigate this now. You need to understand what this risk looks like right now. And you need to figure out how to mitigate this threat, right? Because like there's a lot of probably like contract language in there that protects Chevron from things like that will happen. And I think we're starting to see, Patrick, we've heard from multiple people and a lot of the cyber insurers who won't insure companies unless they get some check mark or, at least check some minimum number of security protocols per contractual basis for companies that they're trying to do business with.
Yeah, the insurance industry is, I think it's interesting. Like some of the research, Coalition just published some stuff, and I mean, it's kind of interesting where they're saying, hey, we're struggling insuring people that use these technologies. I think that's a real, it's a real sign and an aspect that, people need to consider what tech stacks people even have in general from a risk perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, ultimately dollars matter in the insurance industry of whether they can cover a claim or not.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see if they can help move the needle to some extent with modernization. But yeah, I find that fascinating.
Yeah, that is. And when you think, like, when I just take a step back and kind of think about the energy supply chain, like outside of like software, right, and IT, like it's just massive. And so, I mean, like you have ships, there's trains, there's like there's just
Pipeline.
there's so much
Yeah.
technology, and then some of that is legacy for a reason, or because like it just can't, be updated. I mean, we really are looking at vulnerabilities not just for the IT stack but the OT and stack as well, and it's one's a lot easier to fix than the other, or remediate.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the satellites. It's like some of this technology equipment stays in place for 30, 50 plus years.
Yeah.
I mean, like you really have to look at your mitigating controls strongly. Yeah, and remote. We talked about this earlier, but like remote access being like one of the top places where you really have to lock down from getting access to the systems themselves. And I don't know about this in the energy sector as much, but like when I've worked in healthcare, like healthcare, for instance, they'll be like, "Oh, you need remote access? Let me install some VNC. I put it on the internet and go." And like inherently, and that's usually a third party risk of a contractor doing that type of stuff. But yeah, those types of risks are are real and inherent when you have a environment like that.
Yeah, they are real, and I think, I mean, again, kind of what you're talking about, your mitigating controls are what's important, and then like basic hygiene, right? Like making sure things aren't facing the internet, making sure that access is only given when absolutely necessary if it's remote. Otherwise, like, it needs to be a person on the ground, and that just makes it all the more challenging. I think, especially, the energy industry, just like every other industry, like, wants to be more robotic and more remote. And, I mean, it just makes sense, right? Like, there's less loss of life. I mean, it's dangerous work when you think about like people out in the middle of the ocean on some of these platforms. So I think, just the energy industry itself kind of wants to move in that direction where things are more autonomous. But to get there, like you said, there has to be that part that's remote. And how do you kind of keep that safe? And a lot of it does just go back to mitigating controls, and then I think enforcing them,
Right.
truly, like, really truly enforcing them, and not just saying like, okay, here you go. Here's
Right.
your access, random person.
It's the mitigating controls for things like in Patrick's research, the top product category affected by all the new known exploited vulnerabilities second half of last year were network edge devices. So if you've got 10,000 of that specific one device that has some like critical vulnerability in it, how are you going to get to, like, to your point,
Right, you
how do you
can't
go and
scale.
do you
Yeah.
need a person on the ground to go and swap that device out
Yeah.
in 1,000 instances, 10,000 instances? It's like,
Right.
it's
You
mind
can't do
boggling.
that.
Like, right. You almost just have to cut the access off and hope that like the manufacturer has a patch that's, that can fix the device for you versus like, just like from the Chevron standpoint, if you've got all these like smart meters deployed in substations, like, and there's one that was actually some flaw that was discovered in one in Alaska, it's like, can we get a human there to fix this problem and triage it? Like, I don't know.
It reminds me of the old days. I don't know, like this was mid 2000s, maybe late 2000s. Like Cisco ASAs, there was a point in which you had to install new memory to upgrade. And like all these new security updates were only coming with the new version. It's so yeah, and ultimately it's like the people that upgraded RAM got the security updates. People
Oh
that
my
didn't
God.
update,
It's crazy.
I mean, it's just a real reality, and I think that's like a good example of like, yes, this is the reality of what a lot of people with remote systems, and particularly in like manufacturing, energy, maybe healthcare a little bit, have to deal with on a regular basis.
And especially like you're still talking about organizations who weren't like, up until probably like the COVID era, weren't like completely cloud native in the way that they operated their business. So I mean, it reminds me of when I worked at I ran marketing at Counterattack, which is now called Go Secure, an EDR company. At one point we acquired a division of HB Gary, and as we were sort of like integrating companies and we had to go out to Sacramento to one of their core offices there, I actually got to see and touch a server that Anonymous had hacked, which belonged to HB Gary, because I don't know if you remember that, but they hacked the server and basically released all of these internal emails from HB Gary, who at the time was kind of like an up and coming large company, and they had divested a piece of that business specific to endpoint technology to counterattack. Again, now with Go Secure. And like, it was kind of like this like strange, surreal moment where I'm like, oh my God, like I actually got to touch, see, and like run my finger on the actual server that they kept obviously like not hooked up anymore. But it was like, wow, this thing, like this piece of hardware was so instrumental in the demise of a business. And it was just sort of like this like weird thing being able to actually like see this, but not that you get to see much with a gigantic piece of hardware like that, but kind of interesting.
Yeah, no, it is. And I mean, it just drives home, like, patching, right? And it's easier said than done, I think, in a lot of cases, and especially in a lot of large organizations, but just why it's so important, and why it's so important to be able to prioritize, right, with threat intel. I mean, that's kind of, I feel like our team, we're lucky we have teams that like are solely focused on vulnerability management, right? And we're helping them kind of prioritize one of the like many things that we do on our team. But you have to be doing that because you can't like do it all the time every day at once, and sometimes it does feel like it's one vulnerability after the other, because it basically is.
It is.
It's like the mail. Like the mail never stops. It's like, I love what like Jen Easterly says about like, oh, we need, holding kind of the creators responsible. It's just, I think that obviously like we're just kind of where we are now, and that's like a future state. Like we still have to use what we have right now, right?
I'm hopeful like the CRA in Europe, hopefully that helps push some of the vendors to more accountability. I mean, ultimately the biggest problem in hardware and software, in my opinion, is that these things don't automatically remediate or update themselves. So I think we've gotten to a good place with like Chrome and Windows and some other systems. But when you talk about the things that are most targeted, it's like network edge devices. None of those update. Like it requires manual processes, and so I think there's just like same thing with a lot of like file software or any of these systems, and I think we have to move from a mentality, and I think it's on the vendor for actually doing this in a safe way, but like we have to move from this like everything has to be manually patched to like things just patch themselves and are updated. Like when there's a new release of something, like it's tested, it's vetted, it's automated, similar to what we see with Chrome. Like maybe easier said than done, but there are like I look at the edge space and it's like Meraki was doing that, pretty innovative. I think Sophos, there's a few vendors doing that, and seem to be doing it pretty well. But generally, especially as you get into enterprise technologies, you just see it less and less. So yeah, I don't know. That's one thing I'm hopeful for is like, yeah, maybe really this gets pushed to where the onerous is less on the consumer and more actually on the product vendors.
Yeah.
Which would be good for everybody.
The easier you can make it for the consumer,
yeah,
the better. Because like they just want a turnkey solution and not have to worry whether you're, a private individual, right? Or, a major company, you're kind of paying for that solution. And so you're like, wait, what? Now you're telling me it's vulnerable and it has all these issues, so yeah, like how does this get fixed? And you're right, it ends up being a scramble on the customer side vice the vendor side, and maybe both, right? I don't know. Yeah. I'm not at Microsoft on Patch Tuesdays.
No, I mean it's on both sides. Like I think genuinely, like you look at the PCERT teams and them scrambling to respond to the activity happening and doing, the best they can. And get information out quickly. Like we see information come out outside of Patch Tuesday when things are bad. Mm-hmm. So I think that's worth noting or mentioning. But there is a lot of onus put on the consumers of software, where stuff should just fix itself.
With legal right in the middle of all of it, right? Yeah. With like almost like indemnification clauses that like, I mean, they're like the device manufacturers are happy to take, a massive sales order from a large energy company to deploy that's going to, do all these things and fix all these problems. But obviously there's liability. I mean, I have an idea. Maybe we could like route that, Lillian, through satellite protocol and be able to maybe that's the way to update, like thousands of those devices all at once, and almost just patch them remotely versus having some manual human having to go out in the field and do it. But one thing we were talking about also pre-show was AI, and I think this is our final question of our episode today. But Patrick and I cannot escape the topic of AI on this podcast, and for like the longest time, like my hypothesis was we're not going to talk about AI, but I think it's such a critical topic, and it's such a piece now of everything in cyber telemetry. So give us an idea of where you think AI, Lillian, is sort of heading, both in terms of a threat centric standpoint, but then also a defender centric standpoint across the supply chain, because you really are sort of like, you bring this expertise in domain around the supply chain, just kind of where you sit in the organization that you work for. Give us an idea of where you think that is heading from an AI standpoint.
So I think from a defender standpoint, I think that the hope is right that AI will help us finally I think make sense of all of the information that we have. I mean, there's just so much information, so many logs, and whether you are again kind of just looking at IT systems, or you're trying to look at other systems like OT systems or IoT or whatnot. I think that, collecting all of that information and then being able to kind of make sense of it. I think the idea of anomaly detection, which I think anomaly detection, I feel like has been sold or hyped up maybe a little bit more than it's delivered, if that makes sense. Like, I think
Sure.
that like that is where AI, hopefully like the AI engine can help, is with baselining and anomaly detection. At least that's how I like to see it. I mean, baselining things manually is horrible.
A horrible
and so
exercise.
Anomaly detection. So, and I've done it in the past. So yeah, it's pretty awful. So I mean, like I think that from a defender standpoint, and then again, like the prioritization of to like what is critical and what is high versus medium, and that perspective, and hopefully, in theory, like right now, we're kind of taking our threat intel and going to detection, or we're going to incident response, or we're going to vulnerability. Like we're going to these different teams and getting things done. And in theory, that would happen a little bit more seamlessly, right? Than us necessarily hitting someone up and tapping them on the shoulder to say, hey, I think you need to put in a detection for XYZ, or we need to put in some kind of mitigation for this type of email, whatever it may be. From the threat side, I just see so many problems. Like it's scary. I love the thought of AI, right? Like I love the thought of AI, and I really appreciate. I don't know if you all have seen what Anthropic put out with the Wall Street Journal. Did you see that piece? Like that was so good.
Yes.
Like I really appreciate some of the developers of AI, like coming out, being honest, like showing some of the faults that it has. The big thing that scares us right now is just the idea of agents acting autonomously with one another.
Yep.
And then like what in the world does that mean for identity?
Yeah.
And like agents, like we were just talking about Move IT and like moving data out, and like that just scares me. Like one agent being able to move across APIs, and I don't know.
Claudebot?
Yeah. What is it called now?
I think OpenClaw. They changed it too. But
not Claude.
Yeah. I mean,
with a W.
It's super. I agree with you. It's super interesting. In my use and experiences, like there's some things applying AI that has been really useful, but like it's useful if the information is valid and good and you're very focused and pointed on what you want the outcome to be. And so I think one of the challenges and problems people are experiencing is like they want it to boil the ocean. And I think that's where the real risk is too, is like you take the human element out of these things and you just say, hey, go do these things. And then it just drifts off into fabricating information, doing things you didn't instruct it to do. I mean, a whole host of different things. And those risks are real.
Yeah, the ocean is vast, and it kind of seems like that's where like the element of AI exists, almost like you feel like it's this existential thing, but it actually isn't. It's actually a real thing. You just don't know what's possible with it until you either A, build it, or B, you see it and it does something and you're like, oh wow, wasn't supposed to do that. Or from an attacker's standpoint, they're going, oh wow, this is better than what we can do. And it's just like, I think it's like the unknown. It's like the fear of the unknown. It really is, because we don't know, we haven't seen yet.
It's early.
It's
Right?
It's super early. I think that's the other thing that people don't realize too, is like the technology adoption is very fast. So I think that's the scary part, is like, oh wow, like people are just applying and throwing this at everything. But on the other side, it's so immature that like we don't really understand all the real risks. Like we understand some of them, but I think it'll flush out over time, and the market will, once the market matures a little bit, like that's when essentially people figure out how to secure these things. But in the meantime, it makes a heyday for attackers.
Yeah. I do think like both of you make really good points in that, like the understanding is kind of nascent. Like, so it's like what Tom was saying, like sometimes you don't even know like what part of the ocean is. And I think Patrick, what you were saying about trying to do something finite, I mean, that's one thing we're trying to do, is like, I feel like analysts need something to kind of sink their teeth into. So we're trying to just pick a project as a team. And the goal is like, it will help us learn, and then also help us hopefully, understand it better from both sides. But it's definitely, it's going to be an interesting year. I think
It sure will be.
that's my prediction.
Yeah. Hey, you know what? That holds, because it will be, and I think it already has been, even just a couple weeks into this year. So I think there's definitely more to come. There's more that we will see. It's going to be a focus area, I think, of large enterprise. It's going to be a focus area of defenders. It's going to be a focus area of the federal government. And we're still in the same boat, I feel, as defenders, like even just on the vendor side, like VulnCheck. To a certain extent, you don't know what you haven't seen. Predicting things might be good, but it just means you're kind of like planning for future attacks, you're planning for future threats, and you're planning to kind of go, all right, like, how can we do the right things? Perhaps it's an element of AI that can help us do the right things, but maybe there's some area of specialization on the human side that gets us like closer to kind of like bridging that gap between defenders and attackers, and we just don't know yet.
Yeah, sort of one of the ironies I think is that we need more people to learn AI and do AI before we can get rid of the jobs that people have. Before we can use it. It's like we need more people before they can get rid of people, because I mean, it's just like you said, it's so new, and just getting out there and starting to use it. And I think in some ways we're not going to know until it's hit us, because the threat actors, there's in some cases that's their job, like, and that's just, they're just there doing that. And the rest of us have a different kind of job. So
I know. It's true. It's almost like the anti-AI stance, but like preparing the workforce for the like the onslaught like of what's coming with AI, and kind of the way that takes shape over the next 2 to 5 years. So it's a real thing that we know that teams are planning for. But listen, this was awesome. Thank you so much for coming on THREATCON1.
Glad it worked out.
That was great.
For our listeners, stay tuned for our next episode. We are getting up into the teens now with the number of episodes, and we'd love to have you back on, Lillian. We're going to be live streaming from RSA if you happen to be popping around San Francisco at all during the conference. We'd love for you to stop by and come and hang out with us again.
All right. Well, it's so good to chat with you guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
It's great seeing you all.
And thanks to our listeners of the THREATCON1 Podcast, the place to talk about emerging cyber threats with the people who matter. Catch our next episode. See ya.